Welcome. We're going to start with the updates now, and this is section Update 1. And really what we want you to know here, we're going to go through one of the revenue procedures that was passed in 2016 that has the majority of the updates in it. As you know, my name is Roman Basie. I'm an attorney and CPA, and let's get started with this part of the program. So the very first slide, as of production as of today, we want you to know as we get into these updates that there has not been a tax bill passed yet, but there was a whole bunch of changes for 2017. Those changes are contained in Revenue Procedure 2016-55. You can find that on the IRS website. You can print off a copy of that booklet. I have a copy of that booklet in front of me, and it's 30 pages front to back, double-spaced. So just to give you an idea of what you're looking at as far as the tax law changes that we know of right now, and there will be more. We'll go over the purpose of the changes. We'll go over the changes themselves, the inflation-adjusted items that we see. There are 63 items in all that are contained in these updates. And as we've said, Congress and the President will probably change a substantial amount more as we go over the next 4 years. So let's take a look first at the purpose. So this revenue procedure, it sets forth the inflation-adjusted items for 2017 in Section 1. It also specifies the changes that it makes in Section 2. The 2017 adjusted items are in Section 3. The effective date is in Section 4, which is for tax years beginning in 2017. There's drafting information for you in Section 5, and look at the author is the Office of the Associate Chief Counsel. And we're going to discuss Section 2 in this presentation, and Section 3 will be discussed in the next 5 presentations. So taking a look now, let's look at slide number 4, and we're looking at Section 101 of the Protecting Americans from Tax Hikes of 2015. This is known as the PATH Act, and so I'll refer to it throughout the rest of this presentation and the other update as the PATH Act. And if you look here, one of the first sections that was changed, and we're on point 01 of Section 101 of the PATH Act, it made permanent the earned income threshold of $3,000, which is used to determine the child tax credit under Section 24. Now, in an earlier part of the presentation, we talked about how you have a requirement to look at the earned income credit and to see if your client is eligible for the earned income credit. So this is another thing that you must make sure you're aware of, is the $3,000 earned income threshold. Also, you should understand the definition of, well, when do my clients get this child tax credit, and who's it for? A child can be qualifying if they meet 6 tests: age, relationship, support, dependency, citizenship, and residence. So to qualify, the child must have been under the age of 17 at the end of the tax year. They must be related to you, meaning your son, your daughter, your stepchild, foster child, brother, sister, stepbrother, stepsister, or get this, a descendant of any one of those. So you may have a brother's child that you're taking care of. Maybe your client's brother passed away and they're taking care of their child. That child can be a qualifying child as it relates to the child tax credit. That's the relationship test. They must be able to prove that they provided more than half of the support for that qualifying person. They must be able to claim them as a dependent on the tax return. They must meet the citizenship test, and they must have lived with the client for more than half of the tax year, although there are some limitations to that particular requirement. So that's the first change that we saw in this revenue procedure. Let's look at the second one. Under 02 of Section 102, it made permanent the Enhanced American Opportunity Tax Credit. This is otherwise known, there's 100% of qualified tuition and related expenses which is not in excess of $2,000, plus 25% of those expenses in excess of $2,000. That's why on slide 5 that you see in front of you, we make the note that the maximum, what we call the Hope Scholarship, that maximum is $2,500. It's 100% of the first $2,000 of qualified tuition and expenses, and it's 25% of the next $2,000 up to $4,000, which makes the maximum $2,500. I know it's worded a little bit tricky, but that is the next section change in the PATH Act. Let's go to slide number 6, and we're looking at section 103 of the PATH Act, and this is actually section 32 of the Internal Revenue Code, and it is the Enhanced Earned Income Tax Credit. It made permanent the Enhanced Earned Income Tax Credit percentage for an eligible individual with 3 or more qualifying children and the phase-out percentages. It also made permanent an increase of $5,000 in the phase-out amount to reduce the marriage penalty and the indexing amount of this amount for inflation. You know, what the PATH Act did was it made all of these what we called extenders, it made them permanent finally. For years we had gone at the end of every year not knowing whether Congress would extend all of these tax credits and potential deductions that we were allowed over the years. And what you saw in the PATH Act and what we're going over today is they made these changes permanent for our clients and for your clients that you're preparing tax returns for. Okay, now let's move on. I'm on slide 7. Let's take a look at section 333 of the PATH Act, which is section 333.04. It modifies the 831B eligibility rules for a property and casualty insurance company to elect to be taxed only on their taxable investment income. It increased the amount for them of the limit on their net written premiums or direct premiums from $1.2 million to $2.2 million. And look, it also allows them now to be indexed to inflation. Now, what does this mean? So this means that while we raised it from 1.2 to 2.2 of the amount of the premiums that they can be not taxed on as far as taxable investment income only, it also allows them each year to see that 2.2% rise with inflation. So as we have higher inflation, that 2.2 will continue to increase. So Congress doesn't have to go back and revisit this particular section of the PATH Act. Section 202, I always get more interested in these as they deal with airports and airways, as I am a pilot and I enjoy any of the tax codes and provisions that relate to those types of things. So they amended, look at the first bullet point here, they amended section 4261 K1A2 of the Internal Revenue Code, and the effect was to temporarily extend the passenger transfer tax of 7.5% on amount that we pay for taxable transportation. $3 for each domestic segment of taxable transportation, $12 for amounts paid for any transportation beginning or ending in the U.S., and $6 for domestic segment beginning or ending in Alaska or Hawaii. We all see this when we buy a plane ticket. We see these taxes. You may look at a plane ticket and it may say, well, I'm going to pay $199 to fly from Chicago to Tampa, Florida. Well, why is my ticket now $222? And when you look on the ticket, you will see these specific excise taxes applied. But look at that second bullet point on slide 8, which is very interesting. This does end on September 30th. They extended this only through September 30th, 2017. Now, as the date of production of this seminar, we do not know whether they will make that permanent or not. And why would they not make that permanent? Because those segment taxes are tied to a specific dollar. So they're going to want to raise those segment taxes for the airports and the airways across the U.S. So we will see a change to this come down the road. They will not renegotiate that tax amount. Let's look at slide number 9. Now, we're all extremely familiar with the title of this slide, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, otherwise currently known as Obamacare. As I sit here today producing the material, there's a vote being taken on whether or not we will no longer have this, when will it become effective, and of course, this changed the penalty for not having the minimum coverage, and that penalty went to $695, and 2 tax years after the $695 penalty applies in 2016 are now indexed for inflation. At the initiation of this act, we did not have the index for inflation. So if you remember, we saw a gradual increase in the penalty. I think it started at $100, and then it went up a little bit higher, and then it went even higher, and now it's at $695, and now it's indexed for inflation. So it could continue to rise unless Congress is successful in passing the new health care law. Let's look now at slide number 10, and we're looking at Section 921 of the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act of 2015. If you've seen already the presentation that we did on the internet laws, you'll remember that act. That was one of the acts that we talked about where Congress made some of the internet laws permanent under the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act. But what they did here was they increased the amount of the additional tax due for failure to file a return within 60 days of the due date of the return. It is now the lesser of $205 or 100% of the amount required to be shown on the tax return. So they increased it to $205 from $135. And remember, when we talk about failure to file, the failure to file penalty is greater than the failure to pay penalty. So we see that again here in Section 921. So let's move on and let's look at slide 11, and we're looking at Section 32101 of the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, otherwise known as the FAST Act of 2015. It's interesting. Most of your clients have passports, right? I have a passport. You most likely have a passport. If your client owes the IRS $50,000 or more, their passport will now be denied for tax years after 2016. So you want to, if your client is an international traveler or is an international person and they have a U.S. passport, you want to make sure that they keep their threshold of taxes below this amount, or they will not be allowed to travel outside of the United States. They will not have a passport and be allowed to travel outside of the United States for tax years after 2016. So in conclusion, for this first part of the update section, we focused on changes in the tax law as they applied. We will likely have even more changes affecting the 2017-2018 tax year, and we may see changes made to these provisions. Look at the one at the airport facilities tax. That expires in September of 17. We're going to see some changes impacted to those before we get to the 2018 tax filing season. So be very weary of the changes that are going to affect you, the tax return preparers. What's the earned income credit threshold? Did we change definitions of qualifying people? Did we change the 6-item testing that we did? So you have to pay particular attention to what we changed now. Oh, and if you're going back and amending a return, maybe you're amending a return for 2016, pay attention. Grab this revenue procedure. Take a look at the changes in the laws. Make sure your software is lining up with how you're reporting the tax return. That concludes this section. If you have questions on these, there's my contact information, and we'll move on to the next update section. Thank you very much.